In March of 1997, deputies in Rancho Santa Fe, California, stepped into a quiet suburban mansion. What they found inside would haunt the nation. 39 identical bodies, laid out in matching black clothes and Nike sneakers, their faces serene, as if they'd simply gone to sleep. But this wasn't a peaceful ending. It was the final act of Heaven's Gate, a group that believed they were leaving Earth to board an alien spacecraft trailing behind a distant comet. Not a cult from the shadows, but a tech-savvy, disciplined, almost invisible community, right in plain sight. Their leader, a soft-spoken man with sad eyes and an otherworldly conviction that Earth was just a stop on the way to something greater. How did so many intelligent, once independent people come to believe in such a final, irreversible leap? This is the story of a promise that ended in silence. Hit like, subscribe and let's go. Before he became a prophet to dozens, Marshall Applewhite was just a music teacher from Texas, soft-spoken, neatly dressed, with a deep love for opera and structure. Born in 1931 in Spur, a quiet town surrounded by open plains, he was the son of a Presbyterian minister. Religion was in his blood, but so. By the 1960s, he was living in Houston, teaching at the University of St. Thomas. He had a respectable job, drove a modest car, and lived a life that, from the outside, seemed ordinary. Students liked him. He smiled often, though it never quite reached his eyes. There was always a flicker of something else, a quiet storm just beneath the surface. After the sudden death of his father and the collapse of his marriage, Marshall began to drift. He would stare into the sky, sometimes for hours. Friends noticed he'd grown distant. Strange books piled up in his apartment. Something was changing, slowly, quietly. But no one was truly alarmed, not yet. It was 1972 when Marshall checked into a small hospital in Houston, not for illness, but for clarity. He claimed to hear a voice, one that wasn't his own. It spoke of purpose, of destiny beyond this world. It wasn't madness, he insisted, it was revelation. Around that same time, he met Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a fascination for astrology and spiritualism. Their meeting felt too precise to be chance. She told him they were destined to do something great together. Marshall, already unraveling inside, felt seen. Understood. Together, they dove into texts about UFOs, reincarnation, ancient prophecy, searching for meaning in the margins of belief. Friends fell away. His career collapsed. But Marshall didn't grieve. He believed. In Bonnie, he found certainty. And in himself, something began to awaken, or shift. They spoke of leaving Earth behind. Of a mission. Of being chosen. It sounded strange. But to them, it felt like truth. And the line between reality and revelation began to blur. By 1974, Marshall and Bonnie were no longer just seekers, they were messengers. They called themselves, the Two, claiming to be extraterrestrial beings in human bodies, sent to guide others to the next level. They traveled across America in an old sedan, sleeping in campgrounds, handing out homemade pamphlets. Their teachings became more urgent, more bizarre. Earth was doomed, they warned, and only those who followed them would survive, not physically, but spiritually. They began attracting followers, intelligent people, even families, who felt the same ache for meaning. But something was changing in Marshall. He spoke in strange rhythms, stared blankly for long stretches, and often wept without warning. At night, he would say he felt a presence, above. Watching. Judging. Bonnie reassured him, but the look in her eyes shifted too, more solemn, more distant. They claimed they were preparing to be taken. Not metaphorically, but literally. To many, it sounded like science fiction. But for those closest to them, it was starting to feel terrifyingly real. In 1985, the mission took a turn no one expected. Bonnie Nettles, the guiding light, the voice Marshall always leaned on, was diagnosed with cancer. For a group that believed they would ascend bodily into a spaceship, her illness didn't fit the prophecy. And when she died that June in a Texas hospital, everything shifted. Marshall was devastated. But more than that, he was confused. Bonnie was supposed to lead them into the stars. How could she leave without him? Without the others? He didn't cry at the funeral, he simply stared at the sky, silent, pale, as if waiting for something to explain it all. Afterward, he told his followers she had left her vehicle and moved on to the next level. It wasn't death, he insisted. It was transcendence. But privately, something cracked inside him. The teachings changed. No longer was ascension a physical event. Now it required leaving the human body behind. Voluntarily. A dark seed had been planted, and Marshall began to water it. Alone now, Marshall became both shepherd and prophet. And the burden began to show. His eyes grew darker, voice more urgent. By the early 1990s, Heaven's Gate had become a secluded, tightly controlled group. Dozens followed him, shaved heads, genderless clothes, new names. They lived in silence, denied desire, erased identity. Everything was for the level above human. But behind closed doors, Marshall wrestled with terror. What if he was wrong? What if Bonnie was truly gone? He stayed up through the night, recording long, strange monologues, eyes wide, voice trembling, grasping for certainty. In one tape, his words cracked, "This is the most important thing you'll ever hear." There was no longer room for doubt. Either he was the doorway to salvation, or he had led them all into darkness. But it was too late. The group believed him. Fully. Completely. And that terrified him. Because if he fell, they all would. The responsibility was suffocating. And the comet was coming. In early 1997, news broke that the Hale-Bopp comet was visible in the night sky, brighter, larger than expected. But to Marshall, it wasn't just a comet. It was the sign. The ship Bonnie promised had finally arrived, hidden in the tail of the celestial visitor. The group gathered around TVs, scanned early internet chat rooms, watched astronomers with wide eyes. Then came the so-called confirmation. A radio host claimed an object was following the comet. Most dismissed it. Marshall didn't. He called it proof. The time had come. He began recording farewell videos, each member calmly explaining their exit. No fear, no doubt, only peace. But inside, Marshall trembled. What if this truly was the end? Not ascension, but death. The line had vanished. The threat was no longer theoretical, it was real, imminent. And he had to lead them. Every hour, the pressure grew. If he stepped back now, the illusion would collapse. But to go forward, meant crossing a line no one could return from. In the final days of March 1997, the house in Rancho Santa Fe was unnaturally quiet, almost reverent. The group cleaned every room, folded every blanket, laid out matching outfits with surgical precision. Then came the ritual, their last supper. They dressed in black, went out for a simple meal, turkey pot pie, iced tea, cheesecake. Smiling, polite, as if nothing was about to happen. Back at the house, they prepared the bunk beds, draped purple cloths, placed plastic bags and note cards with their new names. Marshall watched it all unfold, frozen. It was happening. One by one, they took a lethal mixture of phenobarbital and vodka, tied bags over their heads, and lay down. Peaceful. Trusting. When it was Marshall's turn, he hesitated. Just a second. He looked around, at the empty shoes, the stillness, the faith he had built. Was this the next level, or a terrible mistake? No answer came. Only silence. But in his eyes, one final flicker. Maybe of doubt. Or maybe, of something else. Days later, when authorities entered the house, they found what looked like a scene frozen in time: 39 bodies, identical clothing, identical pose, identical silence. But amid the stillness, they found something else. Tapes. Dozens of them. Recorded by Marshall and his followers in the final hours. Confessions, explanations, farewells. But one tape stood out. Marshall, alone in a dim room, speaking not as a leader, but as a man. His voice shook. He admitted fear, not of dying, but of being wrong. Of failing the people who gave him everything. He spoke of Bonnie, of love, of guilt too heavy to carry. For the first time, the man behind the prophet showed through, fragile, lost, aching. And in that rawness, something unexpected, not triumph, not salvation, but a strange kind of truth. Not divine, but human. That perhaps he had never escaped earth at all. But in revealing his doubt, in his final hours, he unknowingly left a message far more powerful than any promise of a spaceship, a warning. A plea. A mirror. The tragedy of Heaven's Gate left a scar, not just on the families who lost loved ones, but on a world struggling to understand how faith can twist into despair. Marshall Applewhite's story is not one of cosmic salvation, but a cautionary tale about the hunger for meaning, the danger of blind trust, and the fragile line between hope and delusion. Today, the house stands empty, but the questions remain: what drives us to believe in something beyond ourselves? How far would anyone go to escape a reality that feels unbearable? As you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, where does faith end, and where does control begin? The stars still shine above, indifferent and eternal. What do they see when they look at us? If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, comment below, and let's explore the mysteries of belief together. What would you hold on to if the world told you to let go?